Very warm welcome, Your Excellencies, ladies, gentlemen, friends, partners, colleagues, everyone. Welcome to the British Library, where I have the great pleasure of being Chief Executive, and welcome to a little bit of London that is forever Jaipur.
There is a sense of intense homecoming as we return, even though virtually, to JLF in London. It's been a huge privilege to partner with the British Library, and this collaboration has been so full of joy and learning.
It's a particular pleasure for me to come back to the British Library, which has been my office in London for many years, and where my books have all been written and researched, and it's very nice to see this end of my life sort of double back on it.
Our amazing writers, today more than any time, because of the way the digital age has taken over, we need you to be able to make sense of the past, divine the future, and perhaps set in context what we're going through at this very point of time.
This is the first time I've been to it in London. I've been to the one in Rajasthan before, and it's fantastic. It's got a different vibe here, but it's equally wonderful here.
JLF brings this amazing festival to London. It's a wonderful get-together of writers and thinkers, and you know, I only go to one festival, literature festival in the world, and it's this one.
The people who've been here, both bookshop customers, the authors and the organisers, have been an absolute delight to work with. I can honestly say as well that this is the best dressed, most elegantly dressed crowd at any literary festival I've ever seen anywhere.
It's maintained the standards which I'm accustomed to in Jaipur itself, and I'm extremely happy to be part of it here.
I love this festival. I think it's a privilege for me.
JLF deserves enormous congratulation for the way that it puts its program together here. I think that all of the events are superbly chaired. I think that the setting here in the British Library is just a fantastic environment.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Teamwork Arts and the British Library welcome you to this session of JLF London at the British Library Virtual Festival, presented in partnership with the Aga Khan Foundation UK and our patron, the Murthy Family Foundation. Our magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Our next session today is The Color of Words. Abir Mukherjee, Gunaratne, Aruni Kashyap, and Nikesh Shukla in conversation. Four BAME writers of startling originality make their voices heard. Abir Mukherjee, Gunaratne, and Aruni Kashyap come together with Nikesh Shukla to discuss the core of their narratives and the paradoxes of selective visibility and invisibility in the publishing world. They speak on their writing process and the stories they record, from chronicles of immigration to haunting memoirs to electric crime thrillers to bilingual creativity, in a fascinating session that resonates at many levels. Abir Mukherjee is the best-selling author of the Wyndham and Banerjee series of novels set in Raj-era India. He has won the CWA Historical Dagger, the Prix Polar European, and the Wilbur Smith Award for Adventure Writing. Gunaratne's first novel, In Our Made and Furious City, won the International Dylan Thomas Prize, the Jhalak Prize, and the Club Best First Novel Award for 2019. It was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize and the Orwell Prize for Political Fiction, and was also shortlisted for the Goldsmiths Prize and the Gordon Byrne Prize in 2018. Aruni Kashyap is a writer and a translator. He is the author of his Father's Disease and Other Stories, Neukorn Etia Duroit, and The House with a Thousand Stories. He won the Charles Wallace India Trust Scholarship for creative writing to the University of Edinburgh, and his poetry collection, There Is No Good Time for Bad News, was a finalist for the 2018 Marsh Hawk Press Poetry Prize and 2018 Four-Way Books Levice Award in Poetry. Nikesh Shukla. He is an author, screenwriter, fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, and one of the most prominent UK voices on diversity and inclusion in the arts. He is the editor of best-selling essay collection, The Good Immigrant, and of a number of novels for both adults and young adults, including Coconut Unlimited, shortlisted for the Costa First Novel Award, and longlisted for the Desmond Elliott Prize, Meat Space, Run Riot, The Boxer, longlisted for the Carnegie Medal, and co-editor of The Good Immigrant USA. Our sessions are available to view on london.jlflitfest.org. All our sessions will be available to view on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Do follow our handles, JLF Litfest on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get notified on the upcoming sessions. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can log back on london.jlflitfest.org or find us on our Facebook and YouTube channels. Please do comment by typing in the comment section. And also, we encourage all of you to help keep JLF London and the British Library a free festival by donating on the link below. And support the British Library and help them continue the work they do by donating. Ladies and gentlemen, the color of words. Abir Mukherjee, Gunaratne, Aruni Kashyap, and Nikesh Shukla in conversation.
Thank you so much. Welcome everyone. Welcome Abir, welcome Guy, welcome Aruni. How are you all? Let's start there. Abir, how have you been?
I'm glad to be here. It means I'm away from my kids for 20 minutes or an hour. So that's always a joy, especially now. So I'm feeling good, Nikesh. Thank you.
How about you, Guy?
I'm good, man. Nice to see all you. Nice to not see everyone, but I'm assuming everyone's here. My kid is behind that door and it's shut. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. No promises.
And Aruni,
I'm okay. I'm as good as we can be in 2020. It has been an extremely hard year for everyone, and I actually moved to USC in 2018. So my family is in Assam in India, which means that I'm always calling, FaceTiming. Yes.
So we can have a very serious debate about which of our current locations governments is mucking up COVID more. So just to kind of give everyone the background to where this panel kind of came from, because I think it's important to address at the top. This is a manel for male authors, and I'm sure we are all authors who would always decline to do an undiverse panel that didn't have a diverse range of voices and women writers on it as well. But this panel kind of came about because there was this article in the Times a couple of months ago asking the question, where are the young hot male novelists? And it kind of decried the lack of the young white male novelist, because the Booker long list came out and there seemed to be a dearth of male novelists, even though when you looked on the Booker long list there were a bunch of male novelists on there, like Gabriel Krauser and Chuggy Bain, author, who momentarily the author's name has gone out of my head, I apologize. And I was a bit annoyed because I just thought there are loads of great novelists doing really wonderful things. I think, and the subtext for me from that article was why are we not having the book long list being filled with white male novelists who've written novels about middle-aged, middle-class creative writing professors who have sex with their impossibly attractive younger students and then are sad for 300 more pages. And, you know, I'm kind of glad that those novels are sort of not in fashion at the moment. So I wrote that, I curated an article and got Guy and Abir to kind of talk about where their heads were at when it came to the world of male novelists. I had writers like Paul Mendes and Ashley Hickson, Lovins and Corche Newland, and it was a really great article because it really showed that if you want to know what male novelists are up to, maybe you need to look outside of the kind of middle class white dude sphere. So that's kind of where this has come from. But you know, since that article, so much has happened, and you know, we're in the middle of lockdown, and you know, I imagine you guys feel the same. Like, not a week goes by when we're not thinking, how the hell do you write fiction in the times of COVID? Or how do you work on literature in these strange and uncertain times? So I feel like I'm just going to park the young male novelist thing to the side just for a second, because it's probably quite uninteresting. Go and read my article, the article I curated, if you want to read about that. But so Aruni, I'm just going to start with you. Like, are you writing at the moment? Or what are you working on? How are you finding working on fiction, if you are working on fiction?
Yes, I am working on fiction, but only since last week, because I remembered that I'm a fiction writer. And you know, this is a very important question, actually. It's actually probably the most important question. How do you write fiction now? And the other question is, what kind of fiction do you write to make sense of this absurd apocalypse? I was recently at a reading with Radix Media. It's an organization in New York. And this is the question I found myself asking, because I wrote this absurd novel, the draft of an absurd novel about a woman called Suresha, and she's obsessed with Barack Obama, and she thinks that she's Barack Obama's girlfriend, and this was based on a real person, you know, and I thought that, you know, I could probably make a sense of the absurd apocalypse by sort of following the course of this person who actually exists in Assam, India, where I come from. And she was covered in the newspaper because she actually went to the court, the High Court, and changed her last name from Archana Ojha to Archana Obama. But obviously my character is imaginary, and I started wondering how this person who is obsessed with Barack Obama and is in love with Barack Obama, but also has a fully functioning life, you know, think about the absurd apocalypse. And I started reading more, and I realized that actually characters fantasizing about presidents, political leaders who they think would liberate them or help them is a very underwritten but very common and long tradition, especially in African American writing. And I found a lot of information about it. I also found that it exists sometimes in African writing and also in Indian writing. So I was really fascinated, and I have been thinking about it. How do you make sense of the absurd apocalypse? Do we write a novel by embracing an aesthetics of complete bafflement, where the narrative conventions reject realism as we understand in a traditional way, and sort of embraces an absurdity that would probably even put you know, George Jenney and Beckett you know, to shame because the kind of situation and the political instability that we are dealing with, and the social instability because of COVID that we are dealing with right now. So I've been grappling with that question. I've started revising my novel, and I've been wondering, you know, how to write fiction. What kind of fiction would make sense? What kind of a text would be equivalent of this complete chaos that we are living in? And do we need to write fiction at all? These are the questions that I'm imagining, actually, and trying to find answers to.
And these are questions that we should come back to as well. You know, should we be writing fiction? It's a very interesting question. So Abir, like, just to kind of come to you, when lockdown first happened, and like all of my work cancelled, and I sort of went into panic mode, and I felt like I just needed something to control. And I was thinking about this question, like, should we be writing fiction? Should I be trying to document this time, especially as a writer who, you know, likes their fiction to have a degree of social commentary? And I started writing a novel, and I'm sort of 60,000 words in, like, terrible words into a first draft of a novel. But partly it was like an act of control for me. Like, I needed to control something, but I also wanted to use the time of uncertainty to write the novel that I had been scared to write for a really long time, or the novel that I felt would ruffle the most feathers.
I'm going to ask you a question. Why is that?
That I hadn't written it.
Why hadn't you written it, and why was now the moment for it?
I think now gave me space. It gave me the ability to not be moving all the time. And so, when previously,
but it cleared the decks for you.
Yeah, it cleared the decks emotionally. It cleared the decks professionally, but it also it put me in this room, this sort of invented study stroke spare room stroke exercise room stroke where I Zoom with my mates room stroke reading room stroke like multi-purpose room. I'm in this room most of the day, and just alone with my thoughts and sitting with my thoughts. I thought, now's the time to write the thing that I've been meaning to write. But I wanted to ask you how you found it, because obviously you're in a very specific situation. You're writing a series, it's a series that's constantly expanding. Death in the East came out last year, did incredibly well. Like, are you, and also you're writing historical fiction. So, it probably an easier prospect for you. I don't know.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the first thing I should say is that when lockdown happened at the end of February, I couldn't write for a month and a half. And I think a lot of writers were in that position. I couldn't write anything in March. It was April before I started writing again. But then I went back to do what I always do, which is I write about what angers me. I harness anger. You're right, my books, historically, they're all historical fiction, they're all set in the 20s, but they also reflect what is angering me. So the fourth book, Death in the East, while it's a locked room mystery, it's also my take on Brexit and modern Britain and the way we treat immigrants. So, what really fascinated me was that you go 100 years ago, the streets that are now occupied by Bangladeshi Muslims in the East End of London, 100 years ago were occupied by Eastern European Jews. And they were doing the same jobs and they were in the same houses, and the press treated them exactly the same way. You can take an article from 1905, change the word Jew to Muslim, and you can run it in some of our papers today. So I kept going with that. My fifth book, the one that's coming out next year, again, it was driven by anger, and it was that anger that got me through it. And this one is an allegory for what's going on in India right now with the government in terms of their reactions towards Muslims. So I use my books as an allegory for those. It's different in that it's crime fiction, so people expect a degree of entertainment. The trick is to get the anger and the message through while also killing people, if you see what I mean. But after that, I've actually started a new book. So I finished the fifth one, which comes out next year, but I've started something which is completely different now, which is a thriller set in Britain and America. And the reason is I wanted to look at radicalization. I wanted to look at the ramifications of radicalization, how we understand it, and what the real risks are. So if you listen to the CIA, the biggest threat to America is right-wing radicalization. And yet that's not something that we really look at. So that's what I wanted to cover. So I've put the series to a side. Once the fifth book comes out, I've taken a break from it. But again, the only way I've been getting through this period is by writing about things that anger me, and it's channeling that anger.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was writing The Boxer, which is a book about far-right radicalization and the trauma of racism, and spending time with lots of young far-right people was a really fascinating but also kind of scary time to kind of see where people were, what decisions people were making about themselves and about the world already. And then a friend, Vinay Patel, who's an amazing screenwriter, pointed me to, this is just a recommendation I could tell you offline, but maybe it's interesting to our audience. There's a brilliant podcast mini-series by the New York Times called Rabbit Hole, which is, I just finished listening to it. It's really fascinating. It basically is an investigation by these New York Times journalists into the YouTube history of someone who started obsessively watching YouTube videos, became radicalized by the far right, and then managed to randomly see a couple of videos outside of his filter bubble, his far right filter bubble on YouTube, and then that then led him into the other side, and now he's kind of become a YouTuber. Yeah, and it's all about his YouTube search history. It's really fascinating. Called Rabbit Hole.
Pick your brains after this as well.
Yeah, I've did a lot of research. And Guy, just to bring you in, like obviously, so just so people know, in case this kind of gets too loving, you know, Guy Gunaratne has been like during lockdown, like, you know, as someone who I've thought very dearly of ever since he came into my life a few years ago, he has been like my closest writing buddy during lockdown. We've had some very brilliant, intense conversations about the very nature of like writing fiction at this time. And you know, Guy has been editing his new novel all this time and finishing that and getting that ready. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about what that's been like for you, how you've kind of, because you're also in Sweden, you're not in the UK, so you're kind of watching what's happening at home from afar, and you know, you've got a young kid as well, so like how has all that been for you?
Bit crazy, also so fascinating to hear everyone else's experiences, and always very excited when I hear other writers are like writing, you know, good. It's been crazy. Those intense conversations have meant a lot to me as well, and I think part of the reason they're intense now, and perhaps this is true for a lot of other writers and just artists during this time, where Nikesh alluded to just having space and having to just simmer in the present moment, having to figure out like how you deeply feel. There's nowhere to sort of hide, and sometimes it's quite uncomfortable for people just to sit still and think about their own thoughts, spend some time with themselves. Perhaps parts of themselves that they might not like, and find uncomfortable. And just Nikesh knows this, but like, you know, my reaction usually is to just retreat anyway. I'm quite a homebody. I kind of like to get my head down. And for the last couple of months, it's been the same thing. I've been very lucky to have this one thing to be doing, just finishing a book, and should be finished in the next couple of weeks. And so like it feels like I've been able to ignore the world a little bit, and part of that is also like life, having to rearrange with my wife, like figuring out like how to write and when to write, and figuring out that kind of the mechanics of just time. It's been difficult, but only because isolation has been sort of triple fold, and it's been isolation from people, isolation from really the news. And every time I have to do one of these things, I have to quickly scramble to figure out what everyone else is thinking and talking about, because I have no idea. I honestly just get my head up once in a while and go, Nikesh, what's happening? What are we going to talk about? But like most of the time, it is heads down. It's been good for that. Been able to concentrate, which I think has been a rare experience for most people. But complex, man. I think most people end up at the end of this situation altered in many different ways.
One of the things that I think we've all kind of mentioned, which I think is quite interesting, is this sort of feeling of anger. This sort of, whether it's the simmering anger or whether it's like the sort of the outright, you know, physical, visceral anger that Abir was describing. Aruni, I wanted to come to you because obviously you're in the States. You're kind of in a probably a completely different like headspace to where we're at. Like, you know, how is that anger manifesting in your writing? Are you finding that you're having to pass a lot of it out through the act of writing, or are you finding that it's something you're struggling to kind of compartmentalize?
You know, I have actually started writing a lot of essays that matter to me, personal essays as well as literary essays. I have started requesting editors to let me write. I think during the pandemic, what happened is that it took me a lot of time to sort of come into terms with what is happening. There was a tragedy at home, and I was also mourning for a while, and then more tragedies happened with other people I know. So there was so much death around, so you have to do some emotional triage almost. So that is one thing in the early part of it. But eventually I realized that I'm a writer and I must keep writing. So I found myself making more sense in writing nonfiction, because they get over, and they're shorter, and I think there's a urgency and a topicality in nonfiction, and so they also sort of come out, and you have the gratification of it being read and being heard. So I wrote a lot of essays during this period, a lot of personal essays, but I couldn't go back to fiction for a long time. But then I started reading, the fiction of writers who I have always admired, like Toni Morrison, Nadine Gordimer, Indian writers like Indira Goswami, who I sort of grew up reading. And I started sort of imagining their lives, how they use their anger, to write fiction, because they also lived in very sort of racialized times, very problematic times. I also started reading dissident writers a lot, and I decided to sort of read their biographies sometimes to sort of derive inspiration. So I'm trying to make sense. I did not know if I'm able to, if I had the language yet. But again, recently, as I said, I went back to revising my novel, and it's giving me a lot of joy because the character is funny and her vision is absurd. So as a result, she does really sort of quirky, interesting things. And I think the entire absurd apocalypse, especially that we are calling it now, not 2020, but until say 2016, 2018, if we actually distance from it a little bit and try to satirize it, it's really, really hilarious sometimes. I think that's the nature of absurdity as well. It is hilarious, but it is kind of sad and dark at the same time. So I think I've found a character whose vision is both comic and dark, and I really enjoy spending time with my character, her friends, and her life, and that is bringing me back to the writing table. I don't think I would have been able to do this if I would have found a character who is upset and angry all the time like me, So I needed someone who approaches it with a pinch of salt and probably a little bit of masala as well.
Abir, Toni Morrison said famously, anger is a paralyzing emotion. You can't get anything done. People sort of think it's interesting, passionate, and igniting feeling. I don't think it's any of that. It's helpless. It's absence of control. And I need all of my skills, all of my control, all of my power. And anger doesn't provide any of that.
Did you memorize that?
No, I didn't.
Oh, goodness me.
I'm not going to lie. This is the thing with Zoo. I've now also been distracted by Twitter. No, I'm joking. But no, I googled it very quickly. But
you should have said yes.
Oh yeah, I can just spout off Toni Morrison quotes whenever I want. How do you've written the next Wyndham book, which is like your breaks at allegory. You've written one that's confronting the sort of what's going on with immigration and the media, and you're writing one that's about radicalization. These are all like big, angry topics. Like how do you maintain the kind of the sort of the veneer of fiction when you're doing this?
Well, it's slightly easier for me because I was born and raised in Glasgow, which is it's a city with a lot of anger but very few outlets, and one of the outlets of that is humor. And I think a lot of cities, a lot of working class places have this sort of gallows humor, which is the outlet. If you another writer said to me, why aren't you more angry? If I had your background and put up with the things that ethnic minority writers put up with, I'd be more angry. And there's a limit, as you say, as Toni Morrison says, there's a limit to the value of that anger. You have to channel it. And for me, because I grew up in a city which was deprived, but which had a very, very strong sense of itself, that gallows humor has always been something that allows us to channel that anger into what is hopefully, a useful, but for me, when I write, the gallows humor is what makes the difference. I'm not interested in gore. I'm not interested in writing about murder. The murders are the vehicle to start. It's the means for starting the plot. you do have to entertain. Having said that, at the end of the day, the sort of fiction I write in the sort of, crime and thriller space, you have to have that entertainment factor. The way you get your message across quite often without sounding preachy, because people have accused me of being preachy, is you put it in through the humor. And so for me, it's that balance. It's that balance of providing the story, but also saying what I want to say, but using the humor to almost disarm anybody who would say to me, "Oh, you have an agenda." If you read my 1-star reviews, they are there, don't worry. People do accuse me of having an agenda.
I remember getting a 1-star review on Goodreads for the one who wrote Destiny. The person was very annoyed because they were like, I bought this book in expecting to learn more about the British Empire, and I didn't feel like I learned enough about the British Empire. I was like, that's not what this book is about. Go and buy a book that's about the British Empire.
I've seen reviews. We've all seen reviews by white, critics of ethnic minority books saying, "Well, I didn't learn enough about Muslim culture or Hindu culture in this book," and it's like, well, that's not what the author wanted to write about. It's like expecting every Irish writer to write about the Troubles. We don't expect that. They can write about whatever they want, and that's one of my bugbears as well.
Yeah, there's this thing about I think I was listening to a great interview with Marlon James when his the first book in his fantasy series came out, and he said that with fantasy as well as with fiction, you're either a tour guide or you're immersed in the world, and you're a tourist or you're immersed in the world, and it just made me think that a lot of the time the West expects books by non-white writers to be tour guides. They expect them to get the recipe to make like the family secret paratha, and what the secret at the heart of the jantar mantra is, and all the rest of it.
Exoticism, isn't it? We're here to be exotic.
Guy,
yes.
What is the purpose of fiction at the moment?
So you can say, what's the point? Just what's the point?
What is the point? What is the point? It's a very good question. I thought.
It's funny. No, I like everyone else, been thinking about this, whether being at the desk currently is the most, whether that's the most productive place you could be. And one of the things at the back of my mind are all, these quotes from writers and say, no, this is when writers go to work, which is you put it into the work and you have that object to refer to in the future as to the kind of questions that we were dealing with, sort of experiential questions that we were all asking. I don't think that's true, and that's it's a difficult thing it's a difficult place to get to towards the end when you actually are finishing a novel, thinking, what's the point when things are like there are people who are putting their bodies on the line outside of the window, and whether your words, however seriously you take them, are going to be enough. And I think I got to the point where I had to sort of necessarily, however much writing is part of like my identity, just as fundamentally as anything else, understanding that the space in which I have to engage with the political might actually be outside of this. My books will always have like a political bent, just a political person. But when it comes to actually using my agency, I actually have to leave. It's difficult to do now. But there are things locally, community-wise, that you can't brush away because you are a political writer or you're a writer, or you have a voice even on Twitter or wherever. Like there is that, and then there is actual community work, and I think that's where I came to. There isn't much point in writing at a time when you need to actually use your body to affect the kinds of change that you're talking about when you're writing. That's where I got to. So that's that's what I'd say. Since, I mean, towards the end of last couple of months, really just getting involved with people and organizations around me after the protests, knowing that the BLM protests around this city and elsewhere in particular, just really searching and getting out, because I know I can. In Sweden, we can. So being able to do that has been, I don't know, you begin to put a lot of weight in the public sphere, in the public square, becomes more and more important.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the same question to Aruni and to Abir. Aruni.
Thank you for asking a question. I think this is a very pertinent, important, crucial question. And I completely agree with Guy and Abir. I mean, those are wonderful responses. And I think just to talk about very briefly about what you guys talked about, especially Abir, like people, I think, really have misplaced expectations from fiction writers. They expect to be taught, especially from minority fiction writers. I come from Northeast India, very unique literary tradition. Even within India, we are very underrepresented, misunderstood, misrepresented. Then I'm working here in the US. I was trying to form a panel of Northeast Indian diaspora, and we found like there are 6 writers or 7 probably. So 4 of us got together and proposed a panel once on writing about the experience of being a Northeast Indian writer and what it means and what kind of literary tradition we come from. My first novel was about actually extrajudicial killings in Assam, because Assam tried to secede and there was a long drawn sort of conflict, armed violent conflict, which has been my formation of my childhood. And there are many people, especially from the rest of the country who are not from Northeast, they actually read the book and still email me and ask me, I did not learn anything about India's history or Assam's history or the history of extrajudicial killings in your book. And I think, and I have asked this question, what should we do as writers? What should we do as minority writers? And I have realized in 2020, I have resorted myself to doing what I can do. I have realized that I can go to protest marches, but because I'm so soft that I would actually probably faint if it sounds too much. So I'll be a liability. So I go, but I don't go really too far. And I take my bottle of water with me. And if it is too hot, I would probably not go after a point of time, because I don't think I'm suitable for a tough protest march. I have done that when I was younger in Delhi University. But I think I can write, I can be a witness. And also another thing is that because coming from an hugely underrepresented literary tradition, it means that there is so much to do and so much to write about, so much to be a witness to, so much to say what it meant to be. Like even Indians still don't know what it means to be a person from Assam. What it means to be an indigenous writer from the Northeast. They have very little idea, and we call them mainland Indians because the mainland is a very different entity than the Northeast. So I think I'm telling myself that there is so much to do despite all the problems, and if I can do, I should do it. And I have realized here are the 5 things or 2 things I can do, and that probably doesn't always include going to a march, but probably writing about it, or probably talking to people and highlighting it. And also looking back at history and of my own place, of my own, ethnic identity and be a witness, what it meant to live in the 90s, what it meant to live in the 80s, because that's also true and that's also life. I'm just going back to all of that to survive 2020.
Thank you so much, and I'm going to ask the same question to Abir as well.
I think
we've got some questions.
I was taken by what Guy said. I think he's absolutely right. There is a place and a time for writing, and there's a place and a time for representing in the flesh. I should say I'm Bengali, so a political protest is in my blood. I'm up for it all the time. Unfortunately, I'm married to a Gujarati who's far more sensible than me. And now at my age, Guy, I'm probably about 20 years older than you. I'm not allowed to go out, and even if I want to go out and protest, I get tougher. So I find that my protests, my physical protests are limited, but there's a place for both. And I think, while direct action is always necessary, there is need for the quieter voices, the voices whispering in people's ears, saying, look, I suppose I come from this position where I believe that most people are generally good, and a lot of people are led astray, and that you can convince a lot of people. Now, you can convince a lot of people with direct action, but you can also convince a lot of people just by peaceful, well, not peaceful, because you can have peaceful protest as well, but you can do it by your writing as well. I suppose I'm quite Gandhian in that outlook, in that, I believe in the best in most people, and that is being sorely tested at the moment, I'll give you that. But I think you need a combination of the two. I don't think you can just, and we're seeing that. We're seeing that in America right now, where these protests, as right as they are getting to the point where a lot of people might be questioning whether they're doing more good or bad. And I'm not going to comment on that. I'm just saying it's something that is being raised right now. So yeah, I don't have an answer, but I believe it's got to be a mixture of both. And the older I get, the more I am on the side of the quiet word.
This is a quote I have memorized of it, but there's a brilliant line in the Embassy of Cambodia by Zadie Smith, where she says, "Surely there's something to be said for drawing a circle around our attention and remaining within that circle, but how large should the circle be?" And I think that as writers, like one of the things that we can do is draw a circle around the things that we really, really care about, and ensure that they're there at the forefront of everything we do. We've got a bunch of questions.
Just before you go, just to problematize further, there's a John Berger quoting all over the shop here. This is great. John Berger quote about writing. Excuse me. Writing is an act of approach. So you're trying to approach an experience with language, but it also can be an act of distancing. I'm talking about the actual act of sitting down and writing. My first instinct usually, when something troubles me about the world, like any conversation that all of us are dealing with now, my initial reaction is to sit down and write through and think through using language. I think the at least for me, my personal sort of problem with that act is which one is it? Is it an act of approach, or is it an act of distancing for myself? Am I distancing myself from the issues I care about by coming to the desk first, or only coming to the desk and being satisfied with putting this piece about how I think out into the world? I think that hopefully clarifies how I think about it.
Is it too simplistic to go where I'm kind of looking within the writing that acts as a distancing, but when I'm looking externally, it acts more as an approach? Or is that way too simplistic? I don't know. I'm trying to solve the riddle. Just 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay, we've got a bunch of questions to run through. So pithy or short answers, please, guys.
So four writers for short answers.
Yeah. Sumit asks Aruni, one of the beauties of translation is that it allows stories to reach more people. What do you think people can learn from stories that come from cultures other than their own?
From cultures that are?
Cultures other than their own.
Oh, I think reading fiction is about inhabiting another body, another experience, and it makes us more empathetic, especially if you read. But we should not approach fiction as a cultural experience. It's about knowing the common humanity that is between us. So that is why I say it is about inhabiting another body. And I grew up reading a lot of Russian novels because of the Russian publishing project in the 60s, 70s. We had a lot of Russian novels, and I feel and those were about politics in Russia, culture in Russia, history of Russia. But at the same time, they were about very, very memorable people. So I think people and the conflict of their heart, that is the mainstay core of fiction. And we must, we become more empathetic human beings as we read more fiction. And also emotionally and socially intelligent. We will not say foolish things in public and be trolled. But thank you for the question.
And Ramit has a question for Guy. As a novel that has been described by many as falling under urban fiction, who's calling it urban fiction? I wish to challenge those people. And deeply rooted in multiculturalism, how do you find your city today in a world heavily impacted by a global pandemic?
I haven't been there for a little bit. So how do I feel about a multicultural city being hit by a pandemic? Well, interestingly, the experience in Malmo and in Sweden generally, it sort of shone a light on Scandinavian society more broadly, particularly around how people treat age and aging. The aging parts of the populace. Families in Sweden are very, very small. The grandparents don't usually stick around. And one of the reasons why lots of cities in Sweden have been more, I wouldn't say that you use the word relaxed, but I'm going to more relaxed around sort of lockdown, is because a lot of the elderly population are concentrated around homes, care homes. And that is seen as like, okay, this is the reason why we're doing it. It's very, very stringent around the care homes, but not so much around sort of city centers like this. That doesn't consider the immigrant communities who do have their elderly members of their family in their own home. It's kind of like that narrative where like this is a Swedish society, and Swedish society, a lot of old people are elsewhere, but it doesn't quite consider that section of the populace. That hasn't ever been the case. It's weird to me to have your sort of parents to sort of leave your own home and kind of be at a distance like that. What the pandemic across the board has shown is that disparity structurally between how people are treated in healthcare and in any other sense, in a way that is really hard to ignore. This is not something you can sort of dismiss as sort of like a statistical quirk. Something that's deeply rooted in the structure of it. That's something that has come up multiple times in this conversation. I think shouldn't go anywhere. It's something we should be talking about.
Thank you. And we've got two more questions and then we need to get out of here. But Shweta asks Abir, why did you decide to make your series a period piece, and how do you believe this has influenced the story?
That's a great question. Thank you, Shweta. For me, it was about a search for my own identity. It was, you know, I'm the son of Indian immigrants to the UK. But as Guy and Nikesh would tell you, we don't learn about British colonial history. We didn't get taught it. We learn more about German history in the 20s and 30s than we do about British history. So for me, I would go to school, I would learn something, I would come home and my father would say, that's not right. And so you always had this dual narrative. You'd have something you were taught in school, and then your parents would tell you something completely different. And you would be balancing these two contradictory ideas in your head. And so when it came to writing, for me, as I say, I'm driven by anger. It was this urge to shout about a history that Britain has brushed under the carpet, not only for Indians, but I'm talking about, you know, for British people who are white. It's necessary to know this history. And for me, the big event is the Bengal famine. That's the Bengal famine of 42, 43. I wrote an essay about it in English class when I was 15, and I got a C, which, as any British Indian kid will tell you, is not something you want to take home to your parents. But the fact is that I was given a C because nobody had heard of it. Not even my teachers knew of this thing where 3 million Bengalis were starved to death. You know, and that to me is the anger. That's why I had to write about this period. I had to make sense of it, because I also think Indians tend to look at it in a very romantic fashion as well. We remember certain things about that period. And I think the truth is somewhere in between what Britain teaches and what India teaches. And for me, it was about discovering that history, but also killing people along the way.
Brilliant, thank you. And the final question Zoya asks me, currently the world is beginning to, I'm asking myself a question, currently the world is beginning to wage war against racial injustice. What do you believe are the most positive and most dangerous aspects of this war? How do you feel the individual should be contributing? The most positive aspects of the current movement for racial justice has been that it's never out of the news at the moment. I think the fact that the protests have had such a huge global impact, and weirdly, I think like the pushback from white people has shown that it is really making a difference. Like the hackles that are up show that some really uncomfortable things are being said. The most dangerous aspects of the war are people not showing up and not taking it seriously. And I think as individuals, if we are not if we're not black, we should be showing up for our black brothers and sisters, and just being as great allies as we can, and pushing back and calling out things when we see it. But I would defer to my great friend Reniero Lodge, who, when her book Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People about race came out, she was constantly asked the question, how can I be a good ally? And she actually did a brilliant podcast episode in her About Race miniseries where she answered this question brilliantly. She said, I don't know where you hold power and influence. And I think that's just a really great way of looking at it. Like, how should we be contributing? We should be looking at where we hold power and influence, and we should be doing the work there to be anti-racist. And that's the best that we should be doing at this point. We shouldn't be policing each other for how much we're tweeting or putting on Instagram. We should be looking at where we hold power and influence. And if you hold power and influence online, then do the work online. If you hold power and influence within your family or friendship group, do the work there. That is our time. We're actually 6 minutes over. I apologize for going over, but thank you so much to Guy, to Abir, to Aruni, to Jaipur Literature Festival, to all the viewers. Buy our books. Guy's book is available right now. You've got 5 of Abir's books to choose from. You can buy my books if you want. Aruni's books, not only has Aruni written books himself, but they're books that he has translated, and you should pick those up as well. Buy our books. This is the only way that we get to continue doing this amazing work, is through you guys buying our books. So buy our books. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikesh.
Thanks, Nikesh.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, the color of words. Thank you, Abir, Guy, Aruni, and Nitesh for that fabulous session. And yes, like Nikesh said, please buy the books, ladies and gentlemen. Do buy their books, do buy books, and keep on supporting the arts. And thank you all for watching and being a great audience. We thank our partners, the Aga Khan Foundation UK and the Murthy Family Foundation for supporting the festival. We hope that you will stay with us throughout the weekend and watch the fantastic sessions that we have for you. Our next session coming up shortly is Enlightenment Poems from the Theragatha and Therigatha. Andrew Schelling and Anne Waldman in conversation with Maitreya Bandhu. We now present a reading from the Jaipur Writer short series featuring Derek Attridge from the York University.
To read a poem is to be taken on an adventure into unknown territory. Only on reaching the last line can the reader be sure that the adventure is over. The Scottish poet Don Patterson's poem Two Trees, from his 2009 collection Rain, makes good use of this fact. The last line seems to challenge everything the reader has experienced up to this point. Here's the poem. One morning Don Miguel got out of bed with one idea rooted in his head, to graft his orange to his lemon tree. It took him the whole day to work them free, lay open their sides and lash them tight. For 12 months, from the shame or from the fright, they put forth nothing. But one day there appeared 2 lights in the dark leaves. Over the years, the limbs would get themselves so tangled up each bough looked like it gave a double crop, and not one kid in the village didn't know the magic tree in Miguel's patio. The man who bought the house had had no dream, so who can say what dark malicious whim led him to take his axe and split the bole along its fused seam and then dig 2 holes? And no, they did not die from solitude, nor did their branches bear a sterile fruit, nor did their unhealed flanks weep every spring for those 4 yards that lost them everything as each strained on its shackled route to face the other's empty, intricate embrace. They were trees, and trees don't weep or ache or shout, and trees are all this poem is about. We quickly cotton on to the iambic pentameter rhythm, the traditional rhythm in English poetry for important topics, and the use of rhyming couplets, adding to the formality of the verse. What we're reading has a traditional feel to it, the story of a Spanish villager, no doubt in the south of Spain where citrus fruit grows easily, gripped by the obsessive idea of grafting an orange tree to a lemon tree, creating first a period of barrenness and then an extraordinary flowering. Then the nameless new owner of the property, apparently offended by this magical double tree, cruelly divides it to produce 2 trees once more. As experienced poetry readers, we know what's going on. This is clearly allegory, illustrating something about human relationships, cruelty, and loss. But then, as we wait to discover the dire effects of the man's savage actions, and to work out their allegorical significance, the poem brings us up short. The trees did not die from solitude, nor did their branches bear a sterile fruit, nor did their unhealed flanks weep every spring. Don't be silly, the poem seems to say. Trees don't weep or ache or shout. Who said this was an allegory? Poems can be about what they say they are about. The last line, then, overturns our reading. Trees are all this poem is about. But do we have to believe it?